Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. This is Bo. So we're going to tell you a little something about how to make a end grain cutting board. It's kind of one of the first things you'll do as a new woodworker, and it's something that a lot of people ask for. And on top of that, it's a super duper gift. It's a great way to test your skills as far as how you put together a project. And, lots of gluing and clamping, then some finish work and sanding. And oh boy, the sanding you will have to endure. So let's check out what we're going to be starting with. Materials wise, okay, it's going to take a lot more wood than you think. Okay, I got to be honest with you. So what we're looking at here is some walnut, very ugly looking stuff, but I did plane down a little bit here so you can see what it looks like. Very nice, very even, some English walnut, pretty good stuff. This is Paduke. It looks bright orange until it starts to turn brown after a while, but for a long time it'll be orange, which is pretty sweet. This is some cherry, good, easy, very hard. Again, for cutting boards, you got to think this thing's going to be getting knived and cut. So you got to have to use harder woods. That means maples, walnuts, and in this case, rock maple. Okay. Cherry is good. Maple is good. Walnut is good. If you just did the three of those, you're going to have one really sexy looking board. But when you start planning out your project, you're going to find out real quick, you're going to be using a lot more wood than you really think, especially with an end grain cutting board, as we will talk about in a second. Let's discuss how we're going to get our final thicknesses and figure out what we want. What I want to do in this project is make a 12.5-inch wide by 20-inch long end grain cutting board. End grain? What the hell do you mean? Do you see the end of this board? You see how all of the wood fibers look like little straws and they're pointed up, and you can see that's what an end grain will look like. So on this piece of cherry, you can see it, okay? If we were doing a breadboard, which is just basically cutting strips of this and then gluing it together and calling it good, this is what you'd see. But on an end grain, you'll see the end of the board. It's a lot better and it makes your knives happier. Trust me, an end grain cutting board is really sexy, just a lot of work. So what I'm doing here is trying to figure out the thicknesses of each of these boards, because what I want to get is 12.5 inches, right? So if this is 1 3/4 inches thick, right? This is 3/16, the cherry's 3/16. We got 1/4 inch, and then this will be an inch here. I need to take that bottom piece for myself for another project. You just write this down and kind of do an idea. I need to get 12.5 inches wide, because here's what we're looking at doing, okay? Imagine this is a piece of Paduke. Then I got maple and walnut and cherry, okay? You're gluing all these strips together, and the target goal is to get 12.5 inches wide on this long strip. This will probably be something like 48 inches long, okay? That's what we're looking to do. So it's going to be 1 inch tall by 12.5 inches wide by 48 inches long. What we'll do in order to turn that into an end grain cutting board is we will take, like, if let's say I want 2 inches as the thickness of my end grain cutting board, so it's going to be one big monker, that's for sure. You would cut this 12.5-inch dude into 2-inch sections all the way till you were done. And then we'll stack them up and show you. It's a little easier to show, but this is just the amount of work. So when this looks like a lot of wood, realistically, it isn't. That's why end grain cutting boards are pretty expensive and they're hard. If you want to do some nerd calcs, the way I do it is I want to say I want to make 3 boards wide, right? I'll take all my measurements and then figure it out. And I can see here, I'm pretty short. I'm only at 8 3/8 inches if I added all that together. It means I really need to just do 2 boards. So if I did 2 boards and used all my material, I'd actually have 13, almost 14 inches, which means I got a 1.5-inch delta, okay? Delta. I can trade out one of these maples and then just fill it in with smaller stuff. Like I got this lace wood sitting around, just little bits of scrap. I got scrap bins over there I'll fill it with. And then get to 12.5 inches. And then more than likely, we're going to make a whole bunch, or at least a couple, 12.5-inch wide pieces that maybe are like 24 inches or whatever. But the important thing is, as long as all the pieces are the same thickness, so they could even be like 1.5 inches thick or whatever, right? You want your planks to be uniformly thick. You want them to match the length of all the other planks. Lengthwise, this means you get more pieces. So let's go get this stuff processed. So first things first, raw lumber needs to get processed into something useful. So we're going to take that, throw it through the planer and the jointer, and make some nice square wood. So let's begin. What I'm doing here is cutting my wood to 4-foot lengths. It makes it a lot easier. Plus, remember, you're factoring in all of the clamps and all the other stuff that goes into that huge board when you do your glue up. Using the planer, you're going to be doing the tops and bottoms. Some people like to joint two sides. I personally find that if I use my planer, I can get the top and the bottom good to go. Then I have a flat coplanar side, run it through my jointer, and then it's pretty easy from there. The jointer will clean up that last edge. It's a little different than some people do, but it's been working for me. What I'm doing here is just squaring it up. So that last edge that's a little bit weird, that is what we're essentially squaring up at this point on the table saw. I want to get as much material as possible, but that outside corner can get a little weird. Right now we're cutting all these boards to 1 inch thick. We're going to need to be careful because some of the boards will have a lot of tension inside the wood and can have a tendency to bind or grab the board, or grab the blade. All right, everything's milled, cut to 1 inch thick, everything. But you see there's various widths because that was just how thick our material was. Now, we did pretty good. Okay, I did some good estimates here. Maple is actually hickory. This set was hickory. It's after I started cutting it, it's felt weird and it reminded me of hickory. And sure enough, when it splintered, because I can tell by the way it cuts on the ends, it's hickory. So this is the same stuff baseball bats are made of. Anyway, I thought I'd get 10. I got 8 of them. Some of them are kind of bowed pretty badly, but that's fine. We'll show you how to fix that. We'll put these in the middle and then squeeze them together with some clamps. Should be just good. I said I get 6 cherry. I got 5. I said I'd get about 4 to 8 walnut. I got 4 walnut, so I'm not too disappointed. I got 6 padukes, and then these are lace wood. So I just had 2 of these laying around. I'm trying to see if I can get this so that it sticks on the outside so you see these cool patterning. So that will be the trick. Now here's the cool part. I got scrap bins all over the place, and this is where you can get some scrap wood to put together some stuff. So we've got enough here where we could potentially put together at least another 3rd or even a 4th kind of little mini board. This way we can get rid of some extra material. So I have all this stuff. More than likely I'm only going to get 1 additional board, but it gives me cool stuff. Like this is mahogany, and there's some more walnut. Bird's eye maple, which looks pretty cool. And just a bunch of random cherries. So I could probably get rid of this one because I don't need it, and then we could just play with it. So this adds a little variety to your pattern. So instead of just having 2, we'll now have potentially 3 different boards to pull from so we can get some different shapes inside there. It'll look sweet when we're done. Anyway, let's get to gluing up and go from there. These are cauls. Okay, what you'll do is you'll put your boards on, and I'll show you. But the purpose of these is to keep them flat when you're gluing, okay? So your boards are here, and then you'll clamp these. They'll put pressure on the boards so that you don't get like wavy boards, okay? So anyway, just a second. All right, so we put one up on the cauls here. Okay, you see they're above and on the cauls. I like to use some wood that's slightly longer than my boards. The reason for that is it avoids planer snipe. So planer snipe is when it goes through that planer, it will, as you use a planer, sometimes you'll get a divot at the end and the beginning of your boards. That's because the roller is in the middle. There's a roller pushing it around, and as soon as it loses, you'll get like divots and shit. So just do this. Make a good like 6 inches or so past on each side, and then your middle, all the stuff you want to keep, will be nice and flat. Again, there's stuff like saw marks and other crap. I'm not too worried because what will happen is I'm going to send this through the planer after we get it glued up. We'll send it through the planer to make sure this side and this side are totally planar. There you go. And then we'll be jamming. So I'm going to get this thing glued up. Let's do it. Don't be cheap with the glue. You want to make sure you use a lot of glue. It's better to have it squeeze out more than it be dry. That way you don't have any gaps or dry spots within your glue up. I'm using a little roller in order to put the glue on there quickly, because when you have that much wood and that much glue that has to get done, you don't want your glue to get wet, well, dry. I'm using Titebond 2, which is food safe and good with water. So one thing to consider as to why I only use 4-foot sections generally when I'm making cutting boards or anything like this, you gotta think about it. It's not just the weight of the wood, it's the weight of all the clamps too. So what would end up to being maybe 10 or 15 pounds of wood turns into like 50 or 60 pounds because of all the clamps. So when clamping, that's why I do the 4 foot, okay? And it also makes it a hell of a lot safer and easier going through the planer. At this stage, we're trying to make sure that the now assembled and glued boards are flat on the top and bottom. This will allow the glue up to be super simple because you won't have voids and gaps in between all the pieces that you are going to be cutting. And when we're talking about cutting, one important aspect is also cutting off that weird end. As much as it was useful for the planer, right now it's not. Make sure that when you do that cut, it's super square. That's why I had to go back and do it a couple times on those longer pieces. I'm measuring out 1 3/8 inch. I wanted to not do 2 inches because I wanted to have more pieces available to be able to build more boards. More boards equals more money for the charity that we're trying to raise money for. So it's not a charity, but it's a nonprofit. So that's why I did 1 3/8 opposed to the 2 inches you saw earlier in the video. So I have on my crosscut sled a piece of wood at 1 3/8 inches because that way you don't have to do any measuring. The more you can eliminate that measuring tape, the better consistency you'll have and the faster you can work, and more safely too, especially with a crosscut sled. Do a crosscut sled. So guys, we got all of our parts cut up. Here's board 1, board 2, and board 3. And I have with me the illustrious, most beautiful wife in the whole world, Miss Heather Stevkin. So, Heather, what are we building this cutting board for?
Well, thanks to you, we are building a cutting board that is going to support the Surprise Valley Education Foundation. We started this foundation a few years ago to support a rural community that is struggling with their education services, and we need some extra funding so kids can go on field trips and have some STEM and music and so many other things. So anyway, Bo has been gracious enough to make this cutting board that has lots of labor into it, and we will be auctioning off at our auction coming up in November.
Yeah, so for a lot of you guys, you're probably going to watch this way past November 2019. But if you're interested in looking and researching a little bit more about the Surprise Valley Education Foundation, there's a link in the description below so you can check it out. It's really great. It gives kids in rural communities the ability to have art and science and music and just all kinds of really nice things that they otherwise wouldn't, just because of the fact that there's just so much need in those rural communities for education dollars. So if you're feeling generous and lovely, which I know all my viewers are, at least check it out, give them some views, give them a little feedback, and just spread the word for those people who may know. So Heather, do you want to help me put this board together?
I'd love to.
All right, another fun angle. So board 1, 2, and 3. Now remember what I told you guys originally, okay? The reason we did 3 different patterns is because of the following. So here's board 2, right? If you look at it, this is what the pattern looks like if you put 1 right next to the other. Let's use 3 so you can see, okay? It's kind of boring, but look what happens when we shift just like that. It totally changes the pattern. So this means you have 2 combinations. Now if we added this one, which is our board 3, do a little rotation of these. Now look at that. If you now combine all these together and swap stuff in and out, you're going to have all kinds of funky combinations that would never ever happen. So by having 3 different choices, we got 6 different patterns, and we just keep going, obviously math. But why don't we put this together in a nice like streaming thing, and I think Heather, what she's going to do is put together as many boards as we can get. So what I'm going to do is draw out the dimensions we kind of are looking for lengthwise, and then let her go crazy, and let's see what she comes up with. The one of why you want to have more than just one pattern is simply because when you see Heather sit here assembling the board, there's so much more variety you can get by having those different patterns, flipping them around, so that way when the board comes out, none of them are going to look the same, and you're going to have a lot of unique boards. The glue up is, as you can see, you are going to turn those on their long side. You're going to put the glue on and make sure it's nice and even, okay? You want to make sure there's a lot of glue. Don't worry about squeeze out at this point. That means you're going to get a nice wet joint. That's exactly what you want. The 2 pieces of 2x4, which is what you see on the ends, is also being glued on. That is used for when I put it through the planer, that it'll make it so the ends don't get chunked up. So let me just explain what we just did there. What I did was put an end grain cutting board through the planer. There's two things you need to know about. My planer has what's called a helix head. So it's got not just 3 big knives, it's got like 40 or 50 little dinky square blades that go round and round and round. So you can kind of see that's how I get this finish. It's super smooth, super clean. And also the more important part, it's not chunking like huge parts of this at one point. So a helix cutter head, you'd be fine. If you did very, 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 very small passes with a normal one, you'd be fine. The reason we put these little pieces of 2x4 in the end here is to support the end grain. The thing that will happen if you put an end grain cutting board through a planer is that planing knife's going to come through here and it's going to chip out all this wood, okay? Just like, it's really bad. So you can get a huge chunk that comes out, goes in your planer, and rattles around in there. Or what a lot of people say is that it'll chunk it in half and then it'll fling it out at like 100 miles an hour and just hit whatever is behind the planer. Maybe, but if you just follow a couple steps, very, very, very shallow passes, regardless of what kind of planer you have. Even if you have a super nice one like me, you just super small and put these little things on the end. As you see, those are glued, right, to the end of that cutting board. It supports the grain. Then I don't have to worry about them splitting out. All right, so let's talk about probably the number one thing that'll make you not want to do end grain cutting boards, and that is sanding, okay? What I mean by sanding, I mean you're going to do a lot of sanding. Now, the one nice benefit of coming off the planer is that this is basically already flat, okay? So you don't have to worry about flattening the board, which is really nice. What you do have to worry about is now your progressions in sandpapers. So you need to start at 80 grit pretty much regardless. This is pretty clean. I mean, you can see that. It's already pretty good, but you're going to have little marks like this that came off the planer or little inconsistencies. That's why I usually always start with 80 grit, okay? I wouldn't do 60. I think it's too harsh, especially for me because mine came off the planer pretty nice and I don't want to do more sanding than I have to. Step up from 80 to 100. You'll do 100 until it's pretty much good to go. 120, 150, then 220. I don't go any further past 220 because it's really, hold on, getting a pencil. It really doesn't have much benefit for a cutting board after 220, considering the fact that you're going to be cutting on the thing. So what you'll do between grades, okay? Anytime you're sanding, to make sure you have consistency among your sanding, okay? You'll look at your board in this case. This is a good technique if you need to do even sanding and you don't want to have one part get too sanded or the other. Take your pencil and just mark all over it. So what our objective is to sand off all of the pencil marks, okay? So what this will actually highlight for you, if you get every little part, so I highly recommend, at least on the first pass through, that you do this, because as you see, I'm going across each of the little parts here, okay? So if this part was lower than this part, the second that I sand this, you'll see this part sanded, that part will still have pencil on it, okay? So that is a great reason to do this initially. And if you only sand until the pencil mark is gone, you won't have to worry about over sanding the board in one place, and then you get low and high spots, okay? This is kind of the time you want to square up the board. So I'm just using my crosscut jig in order to square whatever I got. You want to cut off those 2x4 supports, get up your edges, and then you should be good. So really quick update video. It looks really nice, but guess what? This was at actually 40 grit sandpaper. Okay, this is what I'm using to get to this. I tried starting at 80, but then absolutely no. I went to 60, no. Then 40, and finally everything started to level out. Now, here's one thing you need to really consider with these end grain cutting boards, is the fact that if you want to have two sides, like this side and the other side, you're going to have to look real careful for little voids in the wood. So, as example, this other side, you can see right here, there's a void. you can see here, there's little voids in the wood. Okay, so these all have to be filled with epoxy if you wanted to use this side of the board. I'm using a 1/4 inch roundover bit in order to round the edges of the board. I'm using my bench vise and a piece of wood I just screwed into my workbench just to hold this thing. This is pretty much the easiest way to do it. Okay, so coming off of what we just did there, we used the router with a 1/4 inch roundover bit and just went around all the edges. So this is all the edges and here too. Now, be very careful about the direction for which your blade spins on your router. Okay, so we have now some score marks we got to clean up. We'll use the sander real quick to clean those up. And then we'll do a quick pass over the top here in 220 grit to kind of clean it up a little bit. And then we're ready to start doing some finish work. Let's take a moment and talk about what we're going to use for finish on this, okay? We're going to use a 2-step finish. The first step is what we're trying to do is penetrate all of the wood grain in there, so that way the board doesn't have any ability to absorb water. That's what we want. So we're gonna use this thing called Salad Bowl Finish. It's made by General Finish, very good. And we're gonna use 50% mineral spirits. We're gonna cut this in half. The point is, we wanna be able to have that finish soak all the way through this wood grain and to the other side. So ideally, we want to see this side and the other side bleed together. So by cutting this thing in half and basically doing a 50-50 blend of these, it'll be a lot more loose and has a really good chance of penetrating all the way through. All right, so Heather, you think this has been 20 minutes since you started doing this? So here's what you're looking for. You see that shine, using that shop light as a shine? You see how even the finish is now? There's no dry spots, wet spots. As you can kind of see that. Look at the bottom of the screen there. You see that? That's what you're looking for. So you start seeing that it's even and the finish isn't going on all funky and spotty, right? Like you see right about here. You see that right at the bottom of the screen? You see that? That is a spotty. That means it still has the ability to just keep soaking finish. You want to make sure all of it looks like that. Okay, 24 hours later, the finish is basically there. There's a little bit popping up here and there, which is just the mineral spirits kind of whizzing its way out. The salad bowl finish has definitely been good. This is just residual mineral oil or mineral spirits. It ain't really that big a deal. We're going to be coating this in a carnauba wax and mineral oil mix anyway. So it's going to have some time to kind of soak, set up, and then wipe down. So I wouldn't be too hung up about that. So what we're going to do next is the best part. I like this the first time I've used them. But for these kind of boards, see how this big hole? I don't want to sit there and do that big hole. And well, guess what? This is a great bottom. And we're going to take some of these. I got these off of Amazon. They're like these little feet. I'm going to stick them on there, then screw them in. So we're going to have to do pilot holes on these guys. So that way we don't have to worry about, chunking out or splitting out a piece of wood, because that would be pretty terrifying at this point. But the nice part about this is the people will not use this side. They'll use the nice side. All right, now that the feet are on, let's put on the actual real finish. We're gonna use this stuff called Butcher Block Conditioner. It's a mix of carnauba wax and mineral oil. So sometimes you can get a little lumpy, so you can see it looks a little bit hard. Take a thing of hot water and just let it chill out in there for a while. It's gonna heat up that wax and the mineral oil, and then when you go to put it on, it's just a lot easier because it flows a little easier. Basically, it's gonna squirt it on there, rub it around, and then that's pretty much it. You just leave it. Here we are, guys, the final shine on that cutting board. So again, we got about 12.5 inches by about 20 inches long, about 1 3/8 inch thick, 1/4 inch rounded edges, 2 different finishes. One was the mineral oil salad bowl finish. The next was the mineral oil and carnauba wax, which is what gives it that nice shine. So again, I hope you guys appreciated this. If you like the video and you made it this far, why don't you put in the comments, butcher board, bro. That just shows that you made it this far in the video and you're paying attention. So again, thank you all for watching. Again, this board is going to support rural communities, arts programs for STEM and all that other good stuff. So check it out in the comments below, right down there in the description. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, let me know what you thought, and maybe we'll do some more build videos. Look at that. Look at that sexy lace wood, and maple, and walnut, and what is that? Mahogany, and hickory, and all kinds of good stuff. So, all right, anyway, I'll leave you be. All right, like you guys. Talk to you soon.